So I'm sure a lot of people are here because they want to know about sort of what Governor Spanberger's plans are. Can you just talk very broadly about the transition team and how you approached your work and the process?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me and the Southern Environmental Law Center to share our perspective here. It was an honor to serve on Governor Spanberger's energy transition team and did so with a couple good friends and colleagues, Angela Navarro and Will Cleveland. And over the course of the couple months in between election and inauguration, we worked, and I think you heard a little bit with Director Davis about working with the different agencies and secretariats to figure out where their priorities were and budgets to help inform the administration as it's coming into play. But also getting together a really diverse team of stakeholders to round out the committee. So we had a representative from Shell, we had representatives from the environmental community, climate community, conservation, the chief operating officer of Columbia Gas, and so a lot of diverse perspectives at the table to inform an agenda that's focused on clean, affordable, and reliable energy over the next 4 years. So how to do that in the near term with some actions at the legislature, and then some longer term strategies, thinking about regulatory work that the administration could do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, was there anything, again, broadly that surprised you the most about what sort of emerged from all this?
I think there was actually a lot of consensus about looking at data centers in our committee and trying to get them to contribute towards Virginia's clean energy goals and finding different ways in which they could fund different clean energy projects on their own.
Right.
And we're actually seeing that in legislation this session with Delegate Reed.
Right.
He's got a bill to expand the Accelerated Renewable Energy Buyer Program.
Right.
And that's a program that is good for data centers, allows them to contract for clean energy, but at the same time, it's good for the rest of the ratepayers because ratepayers are shielded from those costs, but also any electricity that they buy through those contracts is subtracted out from the utility's RPS obligation.
Right, right.
So it lowers the rest of what we have to pay the rest of the rate base.
Yeah, and again, I think I asked you about this earlier, but sort of, were you looking at this, realizing you were like, gee, you know, the whole country is watching what we're doing in Virginia in terms of data centers. You know, we can really sort of establish what we do here as kind of a model for the rest of the country.
Yeah, exactly. What we're looking at is a big challenge, but that also means it's a big opportunity. And so looking at Northern Virginia, some of the transmission constraints, we think batteries can be really helpful for that and a number of other challenges. And so that's why we're working really closely with Delegate Sullivan and Senator Bagby on a bill that would dramatically expand energy storage in Virginia.
This was the bill that Governor Youngkin vetoed last year?
Correct, and it's a more ambitious bill than even that, and so it's a larger target for short duration storage. It also has a carve out for distributed storage projects, which go on the distribution system, smaller projects, but can really provide some localized benefits in terms of congestion reduction, and those are some of the highest prices that Virginia customers pay in the PJM region.
Yeah. Can you talk about some of the other bills that you're tracking? I think you've mentioned a couple already, but are there any others that you mentioned distributed expansion? What are some of the others?
Yeah, so another bill that is a repeat from last year with Delegate Carlson and Senator Van Valkenburg, a bill to expand the use of distributed generation, so small-scale storage.
Right.
Right now, it's only 1% of the VCEA, and these bills would bring that up to 5%. That also increases the amount of solar that we're placing on previously developed sites, so places like brownfields and parking lots. And if you've been paying attention in Virginia to the pushback that we've seen for utility-scale solar at the rural level, shifting more development towards those built environment locations is really important, I think, for building acceptance of solar throughout the Commonwealth. That's one, and we're rejoining Reggie through bills from Delegate Herring,
right,
and Senator Locke, and really looking forward to getting back into that program, seeing some of the benefits from emissions reductions, and also the funding that goes towards weatherizing homes and providing benefits through energy efficiency upgrades to low-income Virginians.
I wanted to ask you about RGGI, which is been, I guess, sort of controversial. Last week, the U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright sort of dinged Governor Spanberger for wanting to rejoin RGGI, which he called essentially a tax on non-wind and non-solar generation. Can you sort of address why your views on RGGI?
Yeah, I think it places a price on the sort of unrealized externalities of fossil fuel production. Mm-hmm. So what we saw when we were in RGGI last was over a 20% reduction in carbon emissions and the localized air pollutants that go with it. That is tangible health benefits for the communities in which those facilities are sited. But it also generates revenue that goes towards weatherization, energy efficiency, things that lower the overall system need. And so the money is helping sort of right-size where our energy is being produced, and also helping flow benefits to some of the most sort of vulnerable Virginians.
Okay. He also was saying that, during the recent storm, he was like, where did Virginia get more than 90% of its electricity? It wasn't from wind, it wasn't from solar. Sort of trying to make the case for fossil fuels. Can you sort of address that?
Yeah, I think this is sort of a common misconception that the environmental community is pushing for an overnight replacement of all of our fossil resources. That's not the case. Mm-hmm. The Clean Economy Act doesn't require retirement for 20 years, and so right. I think it's important to look at where we are on that trajectory towards getting 100% clean. But you can look at other states and other regional grids and how they perform during similar storms that are more advanced in their renewable development. Mm-hmm. And they saw significant contributions from wind and solar and batteries, especially during those winter storms. And so looking at PJM, there's a small contribution from solar. Part of the problem is PJM only added 2 gigawatts of generation to the grid last year. Texas, ERCOT is half the size, serves half the customers that PJM does, added almost 30 gigawatts last year. We've got to fix the problem at PJM, getting resources connected so that they can help contribute. Even Dominion, in their most recent RPS case, is talking about how solar benefited the grid during Winter Storm Fern. It served those sort of those lulls in the afternoon and allowed their dispatchable generation to hold off during those periods so that it was free to meet demand later on. So it's a grid that we need all sources to contribute to at the moment, and then as we're looking 10 and 20 years in the future, thinking about how those advanced technologies like SMRs can come into play, right. How long duration storage can help us mm-hmm. ride out some of those longer periods. So I think it's sort of a mischaracterization, and I think we just have to sort of realize that we're at the beginning of a progression, working to get there by 2045 or 2050 in the case of APCO. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of looking down the road in the future, Virginia obviously now gets a lot of its energy from natural gas, but there has been talk about bringing in more solar and more other kinds of storage. Governor Youngkin talked about an SMR, a small modular reactor. What do you see Virginia's energy mix being like in a decade or so?
Yeah, I think it's going to be diverse, and I think it's going to be clean. You mentioned the SMRs. We've talked a lot with a company called Commonwealth Fusion Systems.
Yeah, they've
developed
down in Chesterfield County, right?
Mm-hmm. So we're hopeful that technology pans out.
Right.
Because, fusion could be a real game changer.
Right.
But we've also got a lot of solar that's called for in the Clean Economy Act. There are a couple of bills to pretty significantly increase the size of our shared solar programs and get about another 600 megawatts of small-scale solar generation on the grid. And then we've got Dominion's offshore wind project, which is sort of back on track after a hiccup with the administration. But that is 2.6 gigawatts of clean capacity that's going to be delivered and really help during those nighttime hours. So I think it's going to be a diverse grid. We're seeing even advancements in enhanced geothermal.
Right.
There could be places in Virginia where that could be more viable in the future. So I think it's good to keep our options open as we think about what can contribute towards 100% clean grid.
Okay, all right. You and I also talked about environmental justice, and you had said a lot of what's missing are we making sure that we're not falling into the same traps of siting in Black and brown and poor communities? Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Sure. And we've seen a lot of this over the past sort of couple of years as we've started to build out this AI infrastructure throughout the country. A few months ago, I was down in Memphis at an event hosted by the NAACP, and that's where Elon Musk and XAI have their Grok data center, where they basically shipped in 30 gas turbines without pollution controls and without permits and started running them for a year in an environmental justice community. Meta is building a 2.3 gigawatt gas plant in Louisiana to fuel their new data center there, and that gas plant is not going in the suburbs of Baton Rouge. And then here in Virginia, where we're building new gas peakers to serve primarily data center load.
Right.
Dominion's first proposal for a new gas plant was at the site of the old Chesterfield coal plant. And so it seems like in the rush to build out these AI facilities in the name of national security and AI dominance, we're overlooking something that we've already done for the past few decades, which is take the easy route and site polluting resources in poor and minority communities and hope that they don't push back or have the political capital to stop those projects. We want to make sure that these data centers come here and that they're benefiting the grid and that they're benefiting the local communities, not harming them. And so how can we get more battery storage on site? There's a great demand flexibility bill from Delegate Feggins and Senator McPike, because instead of building new capital-intensive resources to serve all these facilities, well, there's been some great research to show that if they just turn their operations down for 10, 20, 100 hours during the year, during peak times, then that can actually free up a lot of capacity and allow some of these resources to come in without new generation. And so I think it's a comprehensive strategy about looking at different ways where they can offset their impacts to the grid, so they don't have to depend on these dirty, polluting resources to come in and fuel their operations.
Okay. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to just ask you to just give any final thoughts about sort of what we should be watching for, both from the Assembly and from the governor and otherwise in terms of Virginia here in the near term over the next couple of years.
I'd say just look broadly at the comprehensive approach that's coming out of the General Assembly. We've got bills that are promoting small-scale storage, shared solar, bills that are looking at how we get more out of the grid we have through grid-enhancing technologies and advanced transmission technologies. And I think when we're talking about affordability and how policies advance affordability, it's important to consider in comparison to what. Because if we're not building all of these clean resources to help meet this new need, then we're going to have to build new gas resources. And those are expensive, both in terms of the initial capital expenditure to build them, the financing costs to pay them off over time, but then for the fuel that they require for the full 35-year lifetime. Solar and wind don't have fuel costs for their entire life. And so we need to be focusing on those things that reduce our exposure to fuel cost volatility, which is only increasing as we sort of focus on dramatically increasing LNG exports. So I think that comparison to what, as we're thinking about affordability and realizing that this comprehensive clean approach is the way that's going to keep costs down as we deal with rising demand and continue on our way to our clean energy transition.
Okay, well, with that, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for these insights, Josephus. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.